In episode 94, Global Warming, we met Aaron Brown, a believer in man-made global warming. He told us the stories being told about global warming were overdone and unnecessarily over-dramatised. He told us that it would be very foolish to be panicked into possible disastrous strategies.
I read the report that the people claiming a 2030 deadline are relying upon, and they have misread it.
Aaron Brown is a mathematician and statistician who was taught at NYU and UCSD. He's also the former chief risk officer at the hedge fund AQR Capital Management. Brown says that activists and politicians are misrepresenting the science in a rush to implement unwise solutions. Did climate activists misread the report, or was it a purposeful attempt to mislead the public? That's not clear, but the IPCC report does use vague language that made it susceptible to misinterpretation.
Properly read, the report is actually an argument for predictable, sustainable solutions over several decades using experimentation and innovation, not a rush toward risky short-term solutions that focus entirely on warming to the detriment of general environmental stewardship. It's a very dangerous game if you want strong, sensible long-term solutions to climate change to scare people into them by making wild short-term predictions. If we need a solution by 2030, that means geoengineering and other dramatic, untested strategies with unpredictable effects. People who really believe 2030 is a disaster year have to focus on geoengineering, scattering beads to reflect sunlight, injecting aerosols in the stratosphere. Rushing these things through without proper testing has entirely unpredictable consequences and could backfire to much worse environmental damage than the problem they're intended to solve.
I think most people would get the impression that geoengineering approaches, like scattering particles to reflect sunlight and injecting aerosols into the stratosphere, are last-ditch resorts which will only be done if all else fails. I think Aaron Brown may have believed that. I certainly did. But I've seen jets at times when no commercial flights were due, leaving abnormal trails behind them, thick, bushy, and long-lasting. The news media seem to be ridiculing the idea that aircraft are leaving trails which are anything other than normal condensation trails from their engines. We are being told that's just a conspiracy theory.
Tennessee lawmakers are trying to ban the intentional release of chemicals into the air based on a conspiracy theory. Chief Transportation Correspondent and pilot Maike Beeler explains what's in the anti-chemtrails bill and what this could mean.
Tennessee lawmakers passed SB 2691 earlier this week. If passed, the legislation would ban chemtrails in a bill based on a conspiracy theory. The chemtrail conspiracy theory claims commercial aircraft release poison into the atmosphere intentionally. Believers say the white lines you may see coming from planes in the sky are not vapor clouds known as condensation or contrails, but instead chemicals being sprayed from jets for a variety of reasons. A 2018 study suggests contrails play a big role in global warming that has been underestimated. The Tennessee bill claims the government may conduct geoengineering experiments by intentionally releasing chemicals in the atmosphere. If the legislation ends up becoming law, it would prohibit the release of the chemicals, which lawmakers claim affect the temperature, weather, and the intensity of the sunlight.
So this conspiracy theory has commercial flights pumping chemicals into the atmosphere. They show us what look like 3 jet fighters, probably giving a close formation aerobatics display. Then they show 3 biplanes, giving the same kind of display, and a couple of little piston-engined aerobatic planes too. They certainly don't look like commercial aircraft, spraying chemicals. Almost all aerobatic display aircraft briefly switch on smoke trails to give a trace of the aerobatic manoeuvres in the sky. They do that by spraying something like diesel fuel onto the hot exhaust pipes. Wikipedia also tells us it's just a conspiracy theory. So do journal articles. Another YouTube video ridiculing the idea comes from somebody claiming to be a commercial pilot.
So let's look at the word chemtrail. It's made up out of two words, the word chemicals and trails. So it must mean that the trail leaving the plane is chemical, right? And it's said that this chemical is being spread out to either manage solar radiation, psychological manipulation, human population control, weather modification or chemical warfare. At least that's what I found out about it on the internet. To make matters worse, it causes illnesses and other health problems. And you're saying this is all coming out of the back of my plane? This seems very superstitious if you ask me. We never had to sign a document during cockpit preparation stating 20 tons of chemicals have now been loaded and are ready for disposal. But still, they must be somewhere, so let's see if we can find these chemtrails.
Okay, let's get started with this. White stuff coming out of the wings and wingtips.
Okay, this is not a chemtrail. This is a wingtip vortex, which can very often be seen if the air is fairly cold and humid.
Okay, this looks bad. Black stuff polluting the air.
If airlines and the government would try to hide the chemtrails, why would they dye them black so that everyone can see them?
This looks more like it. White stuff coming out of those 4 engines at high altitude. This is it, right?
No, unfortunately not. What you see here are these so-called contrails. Contrails are again easy physics and are also made up out of 2 words, the word condensation and trail. And you have created contrails yourself before, trust me. As the air rushes through the turbine, it gets heated up and exits the exhaust at temperatures of 600 degrees. And because the outside air temperature at high altitudes is as low as -60 degrees, the hot air condensates in the cold air, leaving those white trails.
He makes some comments on vortex shedding, which nobody claims to be chemtrails. He pretends that dark exhaust at takeoff, when the engines are working much harder than at any other time, could be mistaken for chemtrails. And then he shows thick, bushy trails and tells us they are just condensation trails. But they look very unusual. For one thing, the aircraft doesn't appear to be flying high enough to be leaving contrails. And they appear to start too close to the engines. They seem to start just above the engines, as might be expected from well-known patented distribution systems. Contrails only form at high altitude, where the air is so cold that the water vapour from the engine exhaust rapidly turns to ice. The aircraft he showed are not at high altitude, probably at about the same altitude as this one. This picture begs a question. When the white trail stops, could it be because all of the engines have suddenly stopped? Or could it be switching from a nearly empty tank of chemicals to a full one? Jet engines cannot suddenly stop and then start again. And since the engines did not suddenly stop, we can see what the contrails from the engines actually look like. Not visible, as would be expected at this altitude. He then shows real contrails at high altitude. They form well behind the engines as the water vapour turns into ice crystals. They're less substantial and they fade away quite quickly. There have been many denials that aerosols are being sprayed into the atmosphere. But if so, why would there be hundreds of patents covering ejection of matter from aircraft? And for aerial delivery of a host of substances, including powder and weather modification compound. After a couple of years, these same people patented a version incorporating improvements based on issues raised when large quantities of fluids, powders and other agent materials are to be transported in and aerially dispersed by aircraft. So why are we being told that chemical trails are a conspiracy theory, and they don't really exist? I started to take that question seriously when I found that some concerned US citizens had given up trying to get information from official sources. They'd confronted a pilot who'd been spraying aerosols and asked him what he'd been spraying. He refused to say what he'd been spraying. Richard Vobes, the bald explorer, asked two long-term commercial pilots what they knew about aerosol spraying in the stratosphere. To protect themselves from certain loss of jobs, their voices were distorted. But their message is clear. Yves is a Belgian who at the moment is based at Frankfurt. He's been a professional pilot for 25 years. Richard asked him about the material which is being sprayed.
I've noticed the chemtrails personally for about the last 10 years. So they have been tested. If you go onto a website that I'll give you initially, it is geoengineeringwatch.org. That's geoengineeringwatch.org. A lot of confirming information can also be found on that website. So we have had many samples tested from various laboratories where they have mass spectrometers, and the main constituents are barium, strontium, aluminium oxide. The first two are carcinogenic. Aluminium oxide promotes Alzheimer's disease, amongst other things. And there are various microplastics, up to 2% uranium, and graphene oxide, which we all know about. These tend to be the basic elements in what they're spraying. The justification for it is to dim the sun, because it's climate change or whatever they want to call it next week, is to dim the sun and to insidiously poison everything. It is the depopulation program. It all leads back to that. It leads back to the World Health Organization. It leads back to the WEF at Davos, and the main players who are sponsoring this are the Bill Gates Foundation and various others. But this is in their Agenda 2030, in the Agenda 2021. It's well documented in the Johns Hopkins University agendas. They are all publicly available. So it essentially does two things. It is to block out the sun and to insidiously poison everything. The animals are eating the grass. It's in the grass. We've been speaking to a lot of farmers. As I say, I'm from Belgium, and a lot of the farmers there are reporting all sorts of problems with animals, particularly newborn animals such as lambs. And yes, it's starting to affect everything, and it is insidious. And of course, your doctor, when you have something wrong, they have no idea where it's from.
Aluminium is poisonous to all known life forms. In nanoparticle sizes, it poisons all members of the soil population. It kills trees from the roots up, it stunts crops and poisons animals feeding on them.
Germination of seeds in the presence of nanomaterials, of aluminum oxide for instance, significantly stunts root growth and leads to a plant that has been compromised.
The root systems of trees and forest flora are dying off, just as the crowns of the trees are also dying off. The forest no longer smells like a forest because the trees are not breathing.
Every single person that I've talked to so far has made the mention that I don't know why it's doing what it's doing. It's burning differently. It's burning more aggressive than it has in years past. It's burning in every direction all at the same time.
Strontium, barium and graphene oxide are highly toxic, and most plastics do not break down for long ages of time. Russ is British. He started as a military pilot and moved to commercial flying.
Is it true? I spoke to Ian Simpson, who's done a lot of research on this, and he was saying that they'll put one substance out, then another plane will put another substance out, and then in the air, the two substances come together, and a bit like araldite, the glue, one being the catalyst, will then create the third effect, as it were. Is that how these chemicals work?
That appears to be exactly how they do it, particularly as I previously mentioned, when you see half a dozen or more come through. The trails do seem to be of a different, shall we say, composition. And that's a very good description, just like araldite. You mix the two together to get the end result. And then, of course, as has been previously mentioned, if they want to then move the jet stream and change the weather system to attack, for example, a particular area of the country for, say, farming and make it extremely wet for a short period, or indeed the other way, make it extremely dry, then they'll fire up HAARP or 5G or Doppler radar systems that would manipulate the nanoparticles in those trails, and hence they can control the weather and the jet stream accordingly.
Do we know when they switch on things like HAARP so that it starts to use the vibrational technology, whatever it is, to start doing that? Do we know, are we able to recognise, say, the pattern in the clouds that has been manipulated from the ground?
Yes, indeed. There is a particular pattern which is, they call it mackerel sky. Mackerel sky is very, very fine ripples in the sky. They say, well, the meteorological term is that it's caused by frequency waves in the upper atmosphere. That is true. The thing is, of course, if you want to do something covertly, without people cottoning on to what you're doing, you're going to make it look as natural as possible. But there are time and time again examples of where they've sprayed and then they've manipulated. Everybody's witnessed and photographed and videoed this mackerel cloud. And the mackerel cloud is confirmation that HAARP has been used, or indeed 5G or Doppler radar. And
I'm just looking now on just on ordinary Google images, and we can see samples on the line here of mackerel sky.
Yeah,
which is
that's the giveaway. It's very difficult to obviously know if it is mackerel, genuinely mackerel, or it's been HAARP manipulated. But again, it normally coincides just within a few hours of the spraying occurring.
Both Eves and Russ brought up Geoengineering Watch. I would encourage a visit to that website. I found a very comprehensive video there, The Dimming, which is especially worth watching. It's too long to give a comprehensive summary, but some of the points it raises are very concerning. Firstly, the particles being sprayed are nanoparticles. They are extremely small and do not occur in nature. They are only a few 100,000ths of a hairbreadth in size. They can pass through the walls of cells and the membranes around the mitochondria, the DNA and other organelles, and through the blood-brain barrier. Nanoparticles do not behave like natural particles. For example, aluminium oxide nanoparticles can burn and even explode. The aluminium, barium, strontium and graphene in the chemtrail sprays destroy DNA, proteins and other cellular material. And the second thing I learned, these metal nanoparticles form an essential part of military weather control programs. As US Air Force Major General Richard Rolig pointed out, weather control was a part of the Vietnam War, and weather control is now a part of military strategy. But it's top secret. Very few people have security clearances to know anything about it. The nanoparticle metals are just what's needed to enable electromagnetic fields to move them about, dragging the atmosphere with them. There are very powerful electromagnetic transmitters, some of the most powerful being in America. One of the best known is the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, HAARP, in Alaska. HAARP got a lot of unwanted attention. The military has officially transferred control of the Alaska site to the University of Alaska. What that means in practice is unclear. There are now more than 100 such establishments around the globe. There appears to be a very powerful one at the Antarctic. It could be that the original in Alaska is now outdated. Eves told us HAARP is what moves the chemtrail clouds to form a mackerel sky. The HAARPists can control their chemical-treated clouds in amazing ways. They can make square corners and circular holes. They can produce floods, droughts, snowstorms, and control hurricanes. To do that, they've distributed vast amounts of nanoparticles over the Atlantic, near the west coast of Africa, as seen in these satellite photos. This is where hurricanes start. Of course, it's illegal to perform such tests above unsuspecting citizens. But the military-industrial complex does not seem to bother about that. They have even tested some features of chemical and biological warfare strategies over them. It seems to be no different in several other countries, including the whole of Europe. All such programs are top secret. Their existence is usually officially denied. But sometimes the security can slip. Kristen Edwards had the responsibility of keeping people on an air base safe from toxicity, including from heavy metals. But she found that toxic heavy metals were being regularly brought onto the base. When she tracked where these poisons were going to, it became clear that they were for spraying the atmosphere. But that has been given wartime military security classification. That clearance does not allow it to be disclosed even to the Environmental Protection Agency. There was a meeting of some of the world's top researchers in this field at Calgary University. They gave the impression that the processes they were talking about were not yet being implemented. They were asked if they had done any research on health aspects of geoengineering aerosols. They said they'd done research on the effects of adding more particles to those already in the atmosphere for estimating things like increase in acid rain. But health aspects? They had not looked into that. Nanoparticles from chemtrails have been found in fish, they've been found in the deepest ocean trenches, they've been found in vegetables, fruit, chicken, cattle, sheep and people. Not just in hundreds of thousands, but in billions.
Many of what we are told are only cellular communication towers have power supply inputs that are 10 times larger than what is needed for communications purposes.
What makes us sensitive to Wi-Fi and to the electromagnetic radiation in general is the metals in our body. And we never used to have aluminum in our mitochondria. The aluminum in our mitochondria makes the inside of the mitochondria resonant with Wi-Fi, and they start heating up, and it starts destroying the mitochondrial DNA at a very, very rapid rate.
How confident can we be that geoengineering on this scale is just a conspiracy theory? Shouldn't we be trying to get some official statement about why weather forecasters are subject to gag orders? Shouldn't we be getting some explanation from politicians who are supposed to be looking after our well-being about why reputable, independent researchers are finding vast quantities of harmful nanoparticles in our food, in our bodies, and in our living environment? In the last days, perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy. But we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
Thank you for joining me for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and press the bell so that you'll be notified as I release new movies. If you'd like to support this project, you're welcome to do so through Patreon. Find a link on my channel banner and in the description below.